Hi, Carrie Myers. Welcome. I'm having trouble hearing you.
That would be mute. Hi, nice to meet you.
Hi, nice to meet you as well.
I was delighted to see the topic.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Yeah, no, very special. We'll just probably wait a few minutes and see who hops on. Hi, Carrie Myers. Hold on one second. Welcome. I'm having trouble hearing you.
The fun of technology.
That would be mute. Hi. Okay, great. Woo, we'll just edit that out. Yeah, so do you mind telling me a little bit about like where you're from and a little bit about you?
Not at all. I live in Portland. I moved here in October. Where are you?
Seattle.
Ah, okay. Was in Southern Oregon for 2 years and LA for about 20 before that. And yeah, happy to share any bits.
Sure. Well, I think we're just getting to know one another until our gathering comes on. So I'm totally open to whatever you want to share. You know, I'm happy to tell you what the goal was or the focus was for the event today.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
If that would be helpful. Well, I've been leading in the psychedelic space for a while now, and a lot of the events that I've been doing with the organization that I run tend to focus on issues like equity and diversity and looking at ableism or looking at big money in the political realm or capitalism or, you know, how we treat one another and looking at conflict in the plant medicine community. I did do a 24-hour event with women's stories in the psychedelic community, and then also an event with 24 hours of men's stories in the psychedelic community. But what I didn't ever really look into doing was something focused more on intuitives or people who have psychic abilities, people that are empaths, and how that relates to, you know, our world today, not necessarily just having to do with psychedelics, but, you know, just wanting to be conscious of the fact that some of us are walking through this world, interacting with a lot of, you know, energy. And, you know, I've had friends that relate to being in like given names like that mental illness is afoot or things like that for having experiences that maybe in other times would be called divinical in some way or a religious experience in some way.
Yep.
So where I've struggled is, as part of my feminism, is looking at, like, even within Judaism, because I'm Jewish, is looking at where things like divination and talking to spirits or are reading signs and reading omens and things like that, and having those gifts to interact with other realms or to foresee futures and have clairvoyance or, you know, ESP, that kind of thing, all things psychic. What I've seen is that with the Crusades and like the war on witches and things like that, that a lot of that stuff has just gone underground in those cultural communities where originally it was quite common. And even today I was having a conversation with a friend about how divination rods were used within Judaism, you know, pretty much like up until like maybe the Crusades and things like that, when they had to kind of go underground with anything that seemed too woo-woo. So I just really wanted to open it up to have an informal discussion. And what I received back was a lot of interest from people that wanted to contribute and consider themselves psychic or consider themselves to talk to ghosts and things like that. I myself have always felt since I was a child that I had like psychic premonitions, and I've had experience with ghosts where I feel like I'm very clearly being given messages or like prophetic dreams. And I remember one time my mother, before she died, saying that I called out to her in a room. She was at a dinner party, and she said other people there heard my voice, you know? And so I think we've all probably had some of those experiences that are experiences that we can't explain to the rational mind. But the idea was to really just kind of host a forum for people to talk about areas where they feel that, you know, where that relates to their life. And I think some of us, I'm a mental health practitioner, and I've worked with a lot of people that have been civilly committed. And when they've been committed, they've talked about like talking to voices and things like that. And within the Native community, you know, that's always very significant in their culture, but isn't necessarily a sign of mental illness, to talk to your ancestors and to talk to spirits. So I feel like in some ways we live in a disconnected world where we've been taught not to trust our intuition and not to believe that we have other senses. And so I think part of our work as humans is to really try to embrace those gifts and really try to maybe hone those gifts or learn about them. Of course, I think you should use every gift with responsibility. But I don't think existing in the shadows is a good idea. So yeah, it's just like creating a forum for this discussion.
Well, I appreciate what you shared. I'm certainly someone, I mean, I was a very sensitive child. I've always been very intuitive, and have at one point when I was raw vegan, I was having a lot of what I would consider psychic experiences, which I was not prepared for. So for me, I was just like, what am I supposed to do with all of this stuff? Like, people don't want to know things about themselves. And it was overwhelming, and I was kind of eager to shut it off. And I, in fact, did, with, you know, coming back to basically a regular diet, paleo. And in the last, I would say, 5 months or so, having really a few years of a very, very deep healing process, lot of loss, tremendous losses, and a very sick dog that wound up dying. I had what I would, I guess, call a psychic experience at her passing, and have been what I would, I guess, consider communications from my guides. Some people call them angels. I don't know the difference, but that has been interesting. And I don't know if you're familiar with Next Level Soul. Do you know Alex Ferrari's podcast?
I might have heard it, but I'm not familiar.
You might be very interested. It's basically all things soul related, and it's skyrocketing. So psychic channeling, near-death experiences, Kundalini, I mean, it's just all across the board. So anyway, that's my super nutshell version.
Hey, Shamsi, Carrie was explaining a little bit of her childhood experiences of growing up as a sensitive and hearing, connecting to, like, having intuition about things and kind of knowing things, and described maybe people not always wanting to hear the things that you might like know about them from your own premonition or intuition. So we were just kind of going around at this point and just sharing our stories of feeling intuitive or psychic or talking to ghosts or having premonitions or prophetic dreams or anything of that nature, that, you know, being an empath. So if you can talk as much as you want, because we're still figuring out the password issue. All right.
Sure. Well, it turns out if people go in from the website, as I just did from the calendar, it'll take you right into the meeting. But if you try to put the code that's in the flyer, then it takes you somewhere and asks you for a passcode. So I don't know why that is, but that's what happened to me. So that's how I got in. Yeah, I mean, I'm schizophrenic and bipolar, so that's the Western take on what some people consider gifts. Certainly, probably not gifts in Western culture to hear things and see things and smell and sometimes taste things that other people are not experiencing. But I heard some cool thing about how animals live in another, not like another dimension, but it made things make sense to me about how animals are like on another magical plane of reality. So they're responding to things that we don't see. And I was like, okay, that makes everything make more sense because they're so symbolic in our lives, the way they appear for us. And there's a reason for that because they're privy to all this information that we're not seeing. It's like when they say some bug can see like 50 colors that humans can't see. They're really, you know, all different kinds of living things are having a totally what is a magical experience to me. I'm at the crossroads of like mental illness, spirituality, and on a journey with plant medicine. So, you know, I think I have a very unique voice, but not always a common experience that people can say, yes, that's happened to me too. Unless you've been incarcerated in a mental hospital or lived on the street talking to yourself, you know, which I don't think means that none of that shit is psychic. I think some of it totally is, and I know that it is, but some of it is just not, you can't communicate it to other people, and it seems to be of no spiritual value, but I still want to believe that it is.
Right on. I appreciate you talking about the animal piece. I often feel like my dog is either my mom reborn maybe or my grandma reborn. It's just she's just so crazy intelligent and seems to know me from another life or something. But then I was thinking perhaps she's just channeling, like maybe our ancestors or our relatives that are close to us can use, like, teleport into the animal, and maybe their soul gets split and they can reside multiple places simultaneously, who knows. But I just feel like sometimes my dog is maybe she's not like my full mother, but maybe like a piece of her soul or something, because in Chinese culture there's a soul for each of your organs. And my mom had a liver transplant, and I remember her personality changing so much when she had the liver transplant, and she started eating meat and all these things that she hadn't done before, and swearing and things like that. With the new liver, it was like some native guy from Alaska's liver. But, and God bless him, you know, for giving that liver to her. But it just made me realize that maybe a part of my mom died when that liver died. So then I got really into this Chinese thing about how each of the organs have a soul, which I thought was fascinating, that we have multiple souls, which I thought was kind of cool in Chinese culture. But I wanted to welcome our other participants. We've been having some difficulty with folks logging in, so I apologize about that. But basically, we're just kind of going around right now and sharing our stories of being psychic or empathic or talking to ghosts or things that maybe came about in our childhood that made us want to, you know, go and do psychic readings, and our parents told us you're silly or you're not having prophetic dreams, or, you know, and maybe no one shut you down with your gifts. So feel free to either raise your hand or jump in. It's a very small informal circle. Christina, do you feel like going?
Can you hear me? Hi. I don't really know where to start. I just always been psychic and I have so many stories to share. I guess I could share a recent one. Well, in the last couple of years, I have been approached by people who really needed help, and I knew they were going to die soon if things didn't change, and I called it out, and things didn't change and they died. And that's been a theme for me for a real long time. I tend to predict when people are going to get in accidents or have health issues or abusive relationships, get pulled over, like all kinds of things. That's all for now.
Right on. Thank you. Is there anyone else who wants to share that hasn't shared yet? Okay. I'll share a story. I think it was 2 summers ago. We were driving across country and I had, we went to a bank that was clearly haunted. It felt haunted right away. I'm really drawn to haunted spots and ghosts. I feel like I have like a special gift for wanting to help ghosts. Like I feel really bad for them sometimes, and I feel like they're misunderstood, and I you know, whatever. I just feel like a connection there. And so we were in this bank. It was an old bank that had been converted into like little Airbnbs or something. And we were in this bank and I was like telling my husband, like, this feels so haunted to me. And as we left, you know, I just kind of got kind of like a interesting vibe with the elevator that it like, it's almost like I could see a elevator doorman that had been living there, not like working in the building for so long with the bank and that kind of thing. And when we came back from this restaurant, we had gone for Ethiopian food and we walked in and I walked ahead of my husband. And as we got closer to the elevator, I reached out and my finger was, I don't know, like a foot away from the elevator button to press it. And it all of a sudden lit up and to go up like we needed. And Sean was behind me and he's like, what the fuck? And I was like, oh my God, that's so weird. Then we got in the elevator, and if anyone, I'm sure a lot of you know that for a ghost to move things physically takes a lot of energy for them, a lot of work. I know that when my grandmother died, I kept having things fall down from the walls for like 3 days and like in the car fall down. And I kept saying to her, like, I know, you're here. I got it, you know. But when we came back from that restaurant, when we were in the elevator, when we got inside, the floor that we needed to go to lit up. And literally, when I walked out of that elevator, I was like so freaked out, but I didn't feel like it was like evil or mean. I just felt like that was so scary just because it was so trippy. It was so in the physical. And interestingly enough, I haven't had so much of like a physical like ghost experience where a ghost is like moving something, like when my grandma died and stuff like that. Except again, on that trip, we were driving through Nevada and I had a feeling that we needed to stop at a hotel. And I said, let's stop at this hotel. And I randomly chose this hotel. It's called Mitzvah Hotel. And it's the most haunted hotel in the United States, but I didn't know that, right? I had said, let's pull off the road. I'm tired. Let's go, you know, rest for the night. And so it happened to be the most haunted hotel in America, if you look it up. And they associate different ghost activity on different floors of the hotel. And the floor that we got put on was the children's hotel floor, where there were 2 dead children that were known to, like, you know, play mischievy like little tricks on the people in that floor. And when I entered the hotel room, Sean walked in and then the door flew open and slammed the door on me. And I said to him, why did you slam the door on me? And he's like, I didn't slam the door on you. And I was like, okay. And then we got in and we laid on the bed and we're looking up at the ceiling, and the chandelier went from a place of stillness to all of a sudden it started rocking back and forth like really quickly. And I'm just like, well, that's super weird. And then when we were sleeping that night, the alarm went off at 3 a.m., which is kind of like the witching hour, 3 to 4 or something like that is the witching hour. But the alarm went off almost like how a little kid might set their parents' alarm just to be like a little trickster for the middle of the night. And I was like, what? I was like, did you set the alarm up? And he's like, no. And so it just was it was things like that. And then one time when we went out to the elevator in the lobby, the elevator opened up, but we hadn't pressed for it. And it was just like something else weird about the elevator. So I'll stop there. But yeah, I really feel like when Jews talk about the end of times or that the dead will rise, I sometimes think that when my astrologer says that right now is the thinnest that the veil has ever been between the spirit world and the physical world, that perhaps that's maybe what the Jews meant when they said the dead will rise, because maybe our ghosts, or the ghosts that are all around us potentially that are wafting about, maybe they will become more prevalent and we will have like more dreams where we're interacting with ghosts. And that veil, she said, is the thinnest it's ever been in human history. And I've also felt like that I've had past lives where I've gone places on this planet where I felt like I had to retrieve energy like from past lives that I didn't, that I wasn't going to be complete in this life until I had accessed. So like there was a place in Mexico that I really felt like I had to go to. There's just been different places in the world that I felt like I really needed to go to. And when I went to that place in Mexico, that was one that really stood out to me and felt very visceral. And I remember having a past life there. And so it was just incredible to feel like maybe like Voldemort had split up his soul and put it in different places. I forget what it's called, like a crux or something, but he had split up his soul in like 7 or 9 different places. And I think that might be an interesting theme of that maybe we, from past lives, if we were like a powerful spiritual person, maybe we left our energy in different places in this world to then go and retrieve. Does anyone else want to share?
Katie, you want to share?
Hello, yes, I will share. However, I am in the waiting room with my kid of my other child's appointment right now. But so I can share briefly. There's nobody else in here except us and my little one, who is very familiar with me talking about clairvoyance, because that's what I do. So I remember having access to those abilities as a kid. And but as I grew, I was very sensory sensitive. And so that was interpreted much differently in the 80s and 90s. And so as I went into my teenage years, it was just like being overwhelmed with all the sensory information coming in from a clairvoyant perspective was thought of as like, well, you have anxiety, things like this. And so they wanted to medicate those types of things. So that, I don't know if anyone has had that experience. It takes your consciousness, your ability to access your skills right away, just takes them away. So you have to become really clear again, which I did, and re-access them. And it took me a long time to realize before I started working as a psychic that, and I still sometimes am like, how are people not having this experience? How are they not? You know what I mean? Like, how do they not know? Like, I'll get the gut feelings when someone's about to cancel or whatever, or just information in a knowing sense. So they just, those things just aren't online. And I've just had the experience of having all the clarity online. So, but that's all I'm going to share right now because I am in the waiting room.
Yeah.
I find it really interesting that you mentioned, Katie, you mentioned having taken medications and then it takes the gifts away. I have often in my life self-medicated with alcohol to numb things. It takes the edge off, but it never has really gotten rid of my gifts. It just makes me not freak out about them so much. Yeah, and it probably does dull them. Probably does. Yeah.
I share my own take on the alcohol, which I don't consume anymore, but like, you know, over a decade ago, that it opens stuff up so much that you're letting in other spirits and not really being a clear channel.
Yeah,
And
that I feel that. I agree with that. That's why now I have
and if you could
Island Hot Lucha instead.
that's because when I go to, like, if I go out to bar or something like that, what I see is people's consciousness completely disconnected and something else is in there. So I'm very dangerous. And also I think why it's legal.
Yeah, you know, that's not a bad thing to consider.
Yeah, so in moderation, I just don't partake at all because of what I've seen.
Yeah, I would say that I've experienced that. I have definitely felt other entities. I've had to clear other entities. I've even had to go to more powerful energy workers, witches, shaman type people sometimes to help me remove different entities. And I have experienced a lot of times being at parties or events where a lot of alcohol and drugs are consumed, and I literally can see that the entities sometimes you know, around specific people, and that was a big eye-opener for me when I was actually able to see with my own eyes entities. Hasn't happened a whole lot, but it definitely happens. Thank you so much.
So I had this healer in Mexico who had told me my sister had gotten like a demonic possession from doing ayahuasca, and just like I think what he's referencing is that, like, kind of like what you guys are discussing with like the spirit of alcohol having this spirit, or other drugs having like a negative spirit, like a demonic possession. And so when he said that, I understood what he meant, which was, I think that she had opened up portals to other dimensions or consciousness or whatever, but doesn't have the skill set to protect herself. And I think what we do to these people, and it's men and women, you know, I think maybe possibly more women, but it's men and women who have these intuitive gifts, right? And maybe they get touted as crazy from a young age, or, you know, I just think that continues to be kind of that war on the witches stuff. But I just, you know, I always had a fascination with the movie The Exorcism, because I do believe in demonic possession. And I think it's interesting that in our society, we have a real disconnect from that, because it's like we don't understand and respect that the Catholic Church still does do demonic, you know, exorcisms or whatever. And so I think we don't realize that sometimes, like, you just get a bad feeling about someone, and you feel like it's not even like them in their body, like they're taken over by some kind of energy or spirit. But yeah, I think I find the spirit of alcohol to be kind of a tricky master, like a snake. Like I see that dumbing down of people's consciousness when I go into a bar versus like a psychedelic arena. But I don't necessarily see the demonic possession piece not happening in the psychedelic arena either. And I think it's difficult to sometimes talk to folks about what you see as like a psychic healer. If you were to say to somebody, oh, your dead mother is, you know, is right here beside you. Do you see her? Like, she's very concerned about you. Or do you know that you've got this, you know, karma that you're working out in your family lineage? Like maybe someone in your family like killed a bunch of children or something. And I kind of believe in the Hindu idea of like the soul family, that we kind of inherit like a kind of a karmic, like we come in here with like a bunch of us being connected. But Shamsi, I was hoping that maybe you might add some of yours if you had a story.
Well, I have a million stories. I'm extremely psychic. Like today I don't remember, I was dropping my friend off and I had my boyfriend in the car and I said, I want to go get these garlic knots. I can't believe this girl doesn't like these garlic knots. I pull the car in and she's there, parked across from me in her car. So that's how, and I have dreams and I wake up and they happen, or I'll wake up and it's on TV. I dreamed 9/11 before it happened. One time I had this vision, it was like all these wolves in the forest. I was looking at the forest, and then these bears came behind them, and for some reason I knew that it meant that my neighbors were pregnant, and I went and asked them, and they said, "How did you know? We haven't told anyone." And she wasn't showing. And so I feel like on some level, like I have friends who say that schizophrenia might not be a bad thing and an illness the way that it is looked at in our culture. And I think if things like knowing what's going to happen before it happens is a gift, then I'm very gifted, but there's nothing I can really do with it. I don't have any control of it. You know what I'm saying? So you couldn't ask me what's going to happen with blah, 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 and I would know. I know random things, and I don't know why I know them, and I don't know what purpose it could have that I know them. Like, even though that was cool that I knew that she was pregnant, it doesn't make her life better, my life better, the baby's life better. It's just weird. And so that's how a lot of my stuff is. And then I hear voices too, and that's usually sinister. Sometimes I hear really beautiful music. But I take antipsychotics, which I'm grateful because it's kind of like how I've heard neurotypical people describe tripping, but it doesn't end ever until you're medicated. It's more and more voices, more and more visions. You can't sleep, you can't eat. I spend a lot of time outside when I'm symptomatic. Um, but the cops found me in the woods this past summer. I was by myself, quiet in the woods alone. And the cops came and put me away for 3 weeks, I think. So I can't afford to not take meds because I get hospitalized sometimes even when I am taking meds, I think. So I don't think in this lifetime, unless some huge shifts occur, that these things are going to play out as gifts in my life. I know they're going to keep happening, but I don't know what they signify or how they could be useful to me or other people, you know.
Other than maybe guiding your own intuition, like your own gut instinct, you know?
Sometimes I think that's why my life is so good and everything's so easy for me because I mean, I know from the outside people look at me and they're like, "Oh my God, you're an alcoholic and you're mentally ill and you've lived on the street and you've been locked up so many times." And I see all that and it was really hard and I'll probably get locked up again. I hate to say it. Um, every time you always swear it's the last time, but then it never is. But um I can't see stopping taking medication. So it's like Blue Lotus is a plant medicine that people usually use as a euphoric, but it also is a natural antipsychotic. And Ghost Pipe is another plant medicine that a lot of witches around here use for dream work. But it also has a natural antipsychotic in it. So I wish this new phenomenon of small pharma would start working with plant medicine in a more serious way. If there's any money behind that, I mean, the fact of what they call coercive psychiatry, the fact that the cops have the power to come and take me. The last time I got taken, I was alone in my house, in my room upstairs, watching comedy on my laptop and 5 cop cars came to my house and I was put away for 6 weeks. And they can do that whenever they want. It doesn't matter what I'm doing. It's fucking crazy. So I hope that these things become useful in my own life, that plant medicine is acknowledged as a relevant intervention for symptoms. And whether or not you consider them symptoms, they are things that happen that grate against consensus reality of the Western world that make it impossible to live. And so, if small pharma could make something with Blue Lotus and Ghost Pipe, that I could take in the morning to be able to be around neurotypical people, my life would be completely different, you know? But then you look at what is neurotypicality, how much of that is brainwashing, how much of that is even healthy, you know?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. No, I think it's interesting that the people we call crazy now, I was kind of saying that at the beginning of the hour, the people that we call crazy now are the people that in the past would have been like the prophets, like talking to the gods and like, you know, all this other stuff. So it's just kind of interesting that we don't like, I feel like in Native American culture, they honor the spirit world, but in the Western culture, there's just such a fierce devotion to just what you can see with your naked human eye. But yet earlier, I think you were on when the discussion was about animals, and you talked about your experience with animals. And when we think about like the cat's eye and everything they're responding to and how their eyes see so much differently. And so I feel like we don't even acknowledge that there's so many things we can't see as far as energy and auras and stuff like that. And there's been some recent research actually authenticating the aura, like justifying the concept of the aura as an energetic field, and that some people have a different part of their brain working to see that energetic field. There's a new science article about it, and I had wanted to share it, but anyway, you guys are welcome to Google it. Does anyone else feel like sharing?
I was gonna just quickly mention, I did some training in spiritual emergence and emergency, which is a term that was coined by Stanislav Grof, who is probably done more psychedelic research than anybody, him and his wife, Christina Grof. And there's a whole school of thought around the like people who are diagnosed with schizophrenia, that some, maybe even all, but I'll just say some of them really are going through a healing process that needs to be supported by a community. And in Brazil, they have these spiritist centers where it's shown to be that someone who's having what we call a schizophrenic experience, not that they are schizophrenic, but they're having a schizophrenic experience, they're often eventually going to become one of the healers at the spiritist center. And so they have a whole group of people, and they channel energy. It's not like Reiki exactly, but maybe kind of. I haven't actually done this spiritist practice, so I can't speak too much about it, but they pull energy from a higher power, you know, and then they'll have like a couple of people behind the main spiritist person that's doing the healing on the person having the schizophrenic experience. And then they also have like nutritional therapy and ecotherapy and animal therapy and peer support, and they bring the family in. The family is a huge part of the healing process. They educate the family on what's going on, and they support them in this beautiful environment. And even cooler than like everything else that I just said, the government pays for it. It's all free in Brazil for people that are, live in Brazil. And so I've had a huge passion of trying to find ways to bring that kind of holistic healing in that sort of style to America. And I know I'm not the only person. So anyone who's interested in that kind of stuff, I would look up spiritual emergence and spiritual emergency. There's books, there's really low cost trainings like I've done. And yeah, I just wanted to mention that. So, and also I wanted to say thanks. Is it Shams? Is that your name, Shams?
Shams.
Shams? Did I say that correctly? Thank you for sharing. Thank you for your bravery and coming out with some of your story. I really appreciate that.
Oh, thank you for listening. I appreciate it.
I would like to reflect that as well. I really appreciate what everyone has shared. That was one of the reasons I wanted to come to this group today, because I feel like, first, I'm not connected in this way with people. I come from what I found out was a very abusive household and background, and just uncovered that several years ago, and had a life of, no psychic, all of that just shut down, tucked away, and not fostered, not seen, just a lot of very kind of just the antithesis of that. All my friends, my family, my colleagues, like there's just been such a different experience. And the last probably 4 or 5 months, it's just really been coming forward strongly. I don't know if anyone was on at the beginning when I mentioned to Leo the podcast Next Level Soul with Alex Ferrari. I've heard dozens and dozens of stories about channels and psychics and splitting, where we can bilocate, our basically a soul can bilocate, all kinds of stuff happening for people all over the world. And it's just, there's no, so much is forward in the media and forward in the news and in what's routinely accessed by people. And this, I really think in the next 5 or 10 years is going to be very, very front and center. And all the different things that I'm hearing are, the podcast is Next Level Soul, when the guy's name is Alex Ferrari. He's adorable. He's from the industry. He's really funny. Scientists are on there, people with all kinds of backgrounds and experiences in this realm. And it's already shot off the charts. Like, he went from 100,000 views early on to well over 1 million a month now. So in these last several months, just having my own experiences, I felt like I really want to connect with other people who live in this realm. Like in my neighborhood, I presume nobody, speaks this language. I know there have to be other people like me, because here I am in like this very normal neighborhood and tucked away, and nobody knows I'm here. So I just appreciate the space. Thank you, Leo, for just venturing down this road. I just wanted to connect more. Like, I think your name is Christina. I appreciated what you shared about your training and like working with shamans. I wouldn't even know where to begin. How does one find someone to work with? I feel like that's one of the reasons I'm wanting to connect, I want to grow that capacity for myself and kind of nurture that. And I guess I'm like this. Where do I start? Where do I start? How do I do this? This I don't know how to do.
You started. You're in the right place. Leo and I both know lots of powerful witchy shamans, ourselves included.
Yay!
I've had quite an experience just knowing Leo. She's used her psychic gifts to validate things that I have been going through. I actually came to Hawaii to work with an ayahuasquera. And so I'm on Maui, and it's been a long journey, but there was an instance where I was doing some space clearing, and I felt this really dreadful presence. And Leo said that this man that was living there, his energy was still connected to the space. Like he was, and she really wanted to know what happened to him because she felt his presence so strongly there. And it turned out later, I found out that he was actually hiding and sleeping right next to where I was at in a different apartment. He wasn't supposed to be on the premises. But so that was just like a really interesting and validating experience with Leo and I kind of having these gifts and then actually finding out later the facts. And, you know, these things are real and they can be practiced and honed. And if you don't mind, I'm actually going to share another story that I feel it's really interesting. I just remembered about a decade ago, there was a peeping Tom stalker guy that was coming to my house. And long story short, I couldn't get him arrested. Like he just always disappeared or whatever. Like I didn't see his face. I like ran after him sometimes, you know, but I never saw his face to identify him. And then one night I went for a walk and I saw who I figured it was him walking away from my place. And I followed him and I got him to turn around just so I could see his face. I couldn't prove that he was doing anything at my space, but then I finally got to see his face. I knew it was him. I could tell from his energy. And then just a little bit after that, I started doing some training. I forget what it was called, but there was this really cool guy that I met on Meetup. And he was taking people out into the woods in the dark. You know, it was kind of wild, but we went and what we did was we practiced expanding our consciousness without any psychedelics or plant medicines. We were learning this type of vision where we could see farther around us. And then also a fun exercise that we did where I would be standing with my back towards everyone. Everyone would kind of scatter out into the woods, and then slowly they would start approaching, kind of like a tiger or something. And I had to turn around and touch their hand if I felt like they were right there. And it was pretty cool. After doing that, just a couple of times, couple different weekends, I was sitting at my computer and I felt the feeling of that creepy guy. And I was able to pull a fast one on him and pretend like I was turning one way and then quickly pull the blinds. And then I saw his face again and then I got him arrested. And if it wasn't for that training, I don't know that I would have actually been able to catch him. So I just wanted to mention that these things can be cultivated. And thank you, Carrie, for sharing. And I'm so glad to have you here with us.
I'll share. Recently, I had a friend pass, and the day that I found out that he passed, he came to me in my dream, and he was so insistent and so strong. And he was standing over his wife or like floating in the air above his wife. And he has 3 children, and the 3 children were like below them, like on some steps or something. And he was like very vehement. He's like, she needs to have a good man, like when she moves on and dates and finds a mate again, you know, after she's grieved or, you know, whatever. But he just like would not stop, like being like almost like someone shaking you. Like she needs to find a good man. Because he was like such an exemplary man. And I was like thinking later on, like, well, why wouldn't he want to like process being dead or, you know, grieve being dead? But he was always such a giver and such a problem solver that I think he had so much foresight about his wife that he knew that she might fall prey to like a guy that seems nice, but then later on he like steals your money, or seems nice, but then he cheats on you, or seems nice and then he abuses you at home and abuses the kids, or God knows, right? But that she might be a sucker for a guy that like smiles really nice, but is a charmer and then is like deceitful or something. And the thing is, he was such a giver and he was such a problem solver that it made perfect sense that he was just obsessed with this. And every night, you guys, that I've gone to bed, because he's now been passed now for like 8 days, about 10 days maybe, that he's been gone. And, you know, some people believe that the spirit sticks around for 3 days at least, you know, as it figures things out and stuff. But I was like, keep waiting each night for maybe talking to him in the dream time again, but that's not happening. And I was like, well, you know, maybe that was it. Maybe that was like his big thing, that he knew, even if he didn't believe in witchy stuff, he knew that I would listen to him in the dream, right? He knew that I would convey whatever I heard, as crazy as it might sound, right? I go to his widow and I'm like, please don't, be very careful about the men you choose to date and really choose a good man. Your husband's very concerned about that. He really wants a really good man for you. It's like, it's just hard, because I think sometimes when you have these gifts, if you're sitting next to like someone and their dog and they're like, oh, Petunia loves me. Petunia loves me. I know she loves me. And she wants some cat food, even though she's a dog. She's so silly. And you're like, well, actually, Petunia seems to be telling you that she's really sad because she was a human in that last life. And now she's in this dog suit. And she wished you knew that she loves you with like a human heart. Like she loves you from maybe a past life connection, or, you know what I mean? But you can't necessarily say these things to people, right? Because they would just think you're bonkers. Or, I mean, you could share them with a close friend, clearly, but like, you know, I just think it's hard sometimes when people are like, I had this experience. I went up to Vancouver recently and I walked into this room. I'd never met these folks before, right? So I'm meeting everyone for the first time. You had this Jewish scientist who's crazy and kooky and eccentric. Then next to him, this Jewish dyke lady who's dressed like Rainbow Bright, and then this therapist dude. And they all seem like very smart, very intellectual, very fascinating people. And then whoo, like a whole big wave of like, woo, there's this huge like, and then my eyes move to this big native lady in the corner, right? And I just see like 5 or 7, like 10 ancestors above her head floating with her. Like she travels with her pack, like her homies. Like you get her and you get a whole crowd of people. And I was like, whoa, it's crowded in here. And no one else had their ancestors like just floating above their heads, you know, around them like that. And I was like, wow. And I was thinking, I wonder if that lady knows her ancestors are traveling with her like that. And I'm like, oh, she knows, like she clearly knows. But it's just, I think it's sometimes hard to navigate this world with these gifts, because a lot of times my husband will say, like, why are you choosing to go down this street for parking the car? It doesn't look like anything would come this way. You're being silly, right? You're not being practical. And I can't explain to him, I don't know why giving a present to this grandma on this street is going to somehow work its way back and we'll be able to pay the electric bill. I can't explain why that makes sense to me. It just I was told to do it, or I was told to check on so-and-so to see if they're okay, you know. I also believe matchmaking, which in Judaism is considered a very holy thing, that when you're matching souls on this earth, because I've done a fair share of matchmaking, is really like the most special gift you can do in this world, because people are so lonely and people are so often looking for companionship and to feel loved in this world, that when you can do this benevolent kindness for no reason, like I think money has its own weird energy, but when you can connect people that sometimes, like, you know, those souls really needed to meet in this life, you know? And so it's a very special gift, I think, to be a connector. Thank you. I'm good. Anyone else can just jump in. Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that there are successful experiences of developing these dispositions with intention. I think it can get really complicated when you have, as Shams was referring to in different ways, when you have things like CPTSD playing a role, or, you know, abusive relationships or backgrounds of any kind. I also have surveillance trauma, Christina, and from a couple of places. So like the avoidance, or like both hypervigilance and paranoia, and building aversion into your life around avoiding certain things, like those of course are all like side effects of various mental and emotional health concerns, but also there, some of those things are premonition. And when you've been over medicalized and or repressed and abused out of whatever gifts you may have come with, it can be so difficult to like untangle the knot and then braid it back into something that is useful and holistic for you, so as a kid, I've had premonition since I was a kid, and I was often beaten for it. um Going into one of my first long-term relationships, um and it usually comes in dreams. Sometimes it just exists, it just shows up in my mind. But I had a nightmare that my former partner and I were going to have a child who was deformed, and I like woke up crying and shared all of this with him. We went on to have some gaps in our relationship, um, me having been polyamorous and him having been various kinds of dishonest. So he ended up being pregnant with a woman in the middle of the course of our 6-year relationship. That child is the one who was born with a deformity, and he was super uncomfortable with it, did not know how to respond, and he felt very wary about all of those kinds of things, of course, moving forward with me. But I mean, there have been others that didn't have quite so negative of an effect since I've been an adult. Sometimes it feels informative, or that I ended up being like emotionally prepared for something. I had a couple of dreams that I just knew that this car that was the subject of a focus of a breakup, a divorce that was happening, the car wasn't going to be a part of the discussion for very long, and I did not know what was going to happen. The car just like disappeared in my mind, and it wasn't a thing to talk about anymore. And the car was totaled. It was in the process of being, like handed over paperwork wise, and she totaled it. And anyway, it's just things like that, like was being said before, like sometimes it's okay for me like to be mentally, emotionally prepared for something, but sometimes it actually has a super negative effect, and sometimes it's just neutral. So if you're working toward developing this type of intuition in some way, and you're having a hard time distinguishing between what might be scary or what is just neutral, and if there are many neutral things and not very many things that feel useful, then I can absolutely understand someone who also is dealing with mental or emotional health issues, that combined with those things, you would even subconsciously just want to continue shutting it down, instead of trying to extrapolate those things and figure out how to build some intention into it. So this has all been interesting for me, and I'm similarly hopeful of figuring out a way. A lot of the work that I'm doing right now, I feel like, is getting me in touch with like my fullest self, and I'm hoping that that kind of progressively leads to some of this growth happening naturally. But I do believe like at some point I need to figure out a way to put some intention into it, because um the traumas that I have correlated to it from my upbringing and times that it has made people really uncomfortable are not things that are just going to go away. So much like, any other trauma and CPTSD work, like you have to put some intention into figuring out a tool that helps. So anyway, thank you.
Jesse, I loved so much of what you said. It was so deep and profound for me. I just want to say thank you for sharing. Like, you obviously, I just found what you said to be very profound and deep. One thought I had was, sometimes I feel like this runs in families. Like my aunt at one point chose not to get in a car. And then later on, like, I forget, there was like some kind of weird car accident that she had the premonition not to get in the car, but couldn't explain it. So I was just curious if anyone wanted to share stories of feeling like people in their family have these gifts. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is, I do think that it is like getting more popular to talk about these things, because I see so many shows. I'm not sure if anyone's watched The Power. Is that the show that just came out? But it's on TV right now. I think it's called The Power, but it's all these girls that end up with like lightning in their fingers. But anyway, just like lots of witchy shows are coming on more and more, and talking about like psychic gifts and premonitions. So I feel like we're entering this age of enlightenment as far as like psychic premonition, because the witches haven't been in fashion like for thousands of years. So I do think that it's like growing, and more people are becoming maybe more conscious of their gifts, and that we have these other senses that we don't talk about in our society. And the other thing I wanted to talk about was houses. You know, sometimes like in looking for a house, I've just had a bad feeling about a house, right? Like, I don't know if someone was beaten there or raped there or killed there or buried there, but I just like get bad feelings about like certain houses where like, even if the house looks really nice and the real estate agent says, oh, this is a great place to rent or buy or whatever, I just sometimes feel like some of these houses like really, you know, carry those memories of that energy of like what took place. And I sometimes think about the genocide that has happened in the United States being like the largest genocide in human history. And there's so much blood on the land for this country that I do believe that there's like a lot of ghosts and a lot of residual like blood energy for this country's kind of karma to work off, and just a lot of ghosts. But I'll shut up and let's go for like 10 or 15 more minutes.
I think I've repeatedly, well, locations I feel like are very obvious to me, but one that feels more complicated is that type of sensation, like what you're referring to, Leo, with people doing business with or being involved with in some kind of way, whether it's community work or volunteering or a professional space, that I think people can carry the same level of residue as a consequence of choices that they've made, or unresolved even trauma that causes them to behave in a certain way and all the rest of their life, like whatever the motivation for it may be. I don't feel like that's an excuse for leaning into being a person who is harmful to others, but I feel like that is the one that I have a more frequent kind of conflict or concern about. Like, land is very obvious to me for all of the historical reasons that I might feel predisposed, either averse or wanting to go and sit in a struggle or a hurt that is correlated with a place. But people, I have a way stronger aversion to when I get that sensation. For the vast majority of that time, when I have that experience, I don't want anything to do with them. And if I'm stuck in a situation where I can't choose out of it, I definitely find myself being unable to perform, having a lot of kind of shutting down responses. Like, I that's something that I'm trying to have more compassion with myself about, and to just listen to myself and build into my life the ability to choose out and walk away from situations, so that I'm not trapped in those kinds of work or whatever environments that feel yucky to me, because I don't want to carry that with me.
I just want to thank you, Jesse, for what you shared. And I think one of the pieces in the title was intuitives and empaths. And I would say that has been one of the harder aspects of living for me, is that I am so empathic. I can feel everything that's going on around me everywhere I am. I can feel people's dissociation. I can feel their anger. I can feel their anxiety. I can feel all of it. So I kind of recently realized, oh, that's a big part of why I always attracted and was drawn toward dissociated people, because it left my load lower. I didn't feel all of my feelings and all of their feelings, because they were more checked out. There was less there to feel.
It's an interesting thing that you bring up, Carrie. There's a lot of articles now online. I found out after being in several narcissistic, abusive type relationships, even one of them, pretty sure was a sociopath. And doing this research, I saw a lot of people saying that empaths are often drawn to those types because they don't have as many emotions or even any sometimes. And so we feel peaceful with them until, you know, the abuse starts happening. And I identified with that so much, I realized that my last partner from so long ago, who was most likely a sociopath, I felt so calm in his presence, like in the beginning. And I couldn't explain it. I never liked to sleep next to anyone, and I just absolutely adored sleeping next to him. And it was like a peaceful calm I'd never experienced, and you know, couldn't get it in a pill or in a tea or anything. And so that was really eye-opening, and I think it would be neat to explore that in a safer way. Like how can we find that peaceful feeling without having to date a sociopath?
I just got out of a relationship with someone who basically gaslit me, manipulated me financially, did some really big, really awful things right under my nose. And I had no idea, which is pretty shocking and difficult, especially as someone who's done an enormous amount of work and really trusted him. But what I've come to know for myself, and I think many others are coming to know as well, is that their trauma creates huge blind spots, and that everything I came to see, everything I couldn't see about him, was because it was so reflective of my abuser. It was the same. And so, you know, in that way, I'm grateful. I know that will never happen again. Like, my eyes are open now in a way that they never were before. But it's still really painful and deeply humbling.
I was going to share something. When you talked about being gaslit, I thought about, well, when I have had like psychic premonitions or just known things, and I said, well, you know, Joe, I think you're, you know, cheating on me, or you, I don't think you're being honest about, you know, the taxes, or, you know, whatever the discussion was, whoever Joe is can come back to me and be like, what are you talking about? Like, you know, look, this all lines up. Like, look at the receipts or whatever. And I can't justify it in the pragmatic world and say, I don't know how I know this, right? I just know that you haven't been honest. Like, I don't know how, I don't know why. When Shamsi was talking earlier about how her gifts like come in and out, I can relate to that. Do you know what I mean? I can't say like, oh, my gifts look like this every day. You know what I mean? It's just like an inclination. And sometimes I feel like I never gave myself permission to explore what it is I see, right? I never gave myself permission to try to talk to people's like ghosts in their life or dead ones in their life, right? I never allowed myself to go down that road because my parents, you know, really pushed like become a professional and, you know, become someone who has like a legit job. I remember being 18 years old and Shamsi knows these two lesbians, but I was like hanging out with these two lesbians, and I was living, you know, across the street from them at the time. We all went to the same school, and I had said, oh, I think I want to go work at this psychic shop. And when I had told my parents that, they said, well, that's ridiculous. You know, you need to like go to school and get an education. But even as I look back now and see those missing pieces of my own story, I'm like, oh, so I even knew at 18, like maybe I would have been a shitty psychic. You know what I mean? Maybe sometimes you need to learn, and you need to learn about your gifts, and you need to learn about what resonates as true for you. Do you know what I mean? And how you test that. and how you figure things out for yourself. But I think looking back, it would have been interesting to see the trajectory of my life if I had allowed myself to be a psychic, right? I think it's very interesting that we don't allow ourselves that as a job opportunity.
Oh, that just reminds me. Leo was telling me the other day that she thinks that I should just advertise myself as a psychic. I'm a psychedelic integration therapist and an herbalist, and she was entertaining the idea for me that, you know, maybe I should just add psychic to my list. And there's such a stigma, like I am psychic, and it took me forever to just say it. I used to say I'm kind of psychic, and my partner in psychedelic integration, he was like, "You're psychic, like big time, own it." And I was like, oh, wow, somebody's validating. I mean, I needed the validation. And even though I knew it, just like in this society, being labeled as crazy or hokey and cheesy, you know, so I don't put psychic on any of my advertising ever. And to be honest, I also judge people when they tell me they're psychic. I don't always believe them. I often don't believe them. Often I don't actually believe them because then they prove to me they're really kind of shisty. You know, putting them in the camp of like Miss Cleo 1-900, you know, pay me by the minute kind of stuff. I actually, fun fact about me, I worked for Miss Cleo a long time ago for about a week. And when I realized that it was all a scam, I quit. But anyhow, I'd be really interested to know what y'all think about, I don't know, just the stigma. What do you call it when internalized prejudice against the word psychic? Anybody have any thoughts about that?
Well, I feel like a lot of times our, what Debbie Ford called our shadow is at work, you know, the parts of us that, let's just say it's been really deep the last several years. Like I know me so well, and that has meant so much in terms of what I know about how I feel about other people, and like getting to know my own judge, the part of me that judges me, meant, oh, like this is related. What's happening inside is what's happening outside. And I will say Sarah Landon, who channels the council, talked about, well, the council shared, birth is much more like a death, and death is much more like a birth. In that, I will say my perspective at this point in my life is that all that we cannot see or hear or taste or smell or touch or experience tangibly is far more true and real than what we're doing here. Like the science will, in I don't know how many decades, come to, you know, we're in this human game experience thing. Like this is not the truth of us. And I think that it can be really powerful to connect to, like, or I will say it has been for me to connect to that part of like the questioner. Like, how is this not something valid for me? Or what you said about, you know, I really wanted the validation. Like, I think you have gifts, and I think it's badass to bring those gifts to the world.
Right on, Carrie. Thank you so much. I'm very touched by the reflections of today, and I'd really like to do this again. And the thing is, I don't mind a smaller group. Do you know what I mean? I feel like it's very intimate and sweet. So Shamsi, I'm just wondering if you or anyone else who hasn't spoken in the last few minutes want to kind of end us on a note. It doesn't have to be a positive note. You can just end us on a note of
Yeah, well, I liked what you had to say about, like, it's almost like internalized racism, internalized self-hatred about being psychic, right? It's embarrassing. It's an embarrassing word. And it's been really important for me to claim witch and to tell everybody I'm a witch and be very out with it. Because we went through, they burned 9 million of us, you know? And it means something to claim it and say it's not weird. It's not, this is my religion, and it's not a choice. To me, it's the same as being queer or being black, or it's how I am. And nobody would choose it because people can tell I'm a witch, especially Latinx people will just call me a witch all over in the rainforest, in the barrio. It's very easy for some reason in their culture to recognize a witch, and you just call someone a witch, and it's not good or bad. Um, but yeah, I would like to see the word psychic reclaimed, and I would like to do some of that work in my own life because it hits me exactly the same. And as someone who's incredibly psychic and doesn't have a use for it, I appreciate the encouragement that we'll all find use for our gifts, if for no other reason to enrich our lives and make them more beautiful and enjoyable. And Ulysses is stretching.
I think that's beautiful. I really love what you said about how you're recognized as a witch right away from these certain people who maybe in their culture, they're just better at like recognizing like the bruja or the curandera, like, and I think I was watching a show last night and there was like an African like witchy community, and it was just interesting how they feared the witch in this community in Africa, and yet there was like a power there that was kind of scary. And I mean, I do believe in epigenetic memories. I do appreciate you bringing up all the witches that have died. I don't even think that collectively as a society, we've, as a world culture, if I don't think we've held ourselves accountable for what we've done to these people. And these are people with serious gifts that were destroyed, right? And they were probably destroyed because of their power. So I think there might be some trauma there for our epigenetic memories for us to come forward and say we have these gifts just because of what's happened in the past. But I also feel like they didn't kill all of the psychic gifts off, you know. I don't know that they're coming in as strong, you know. They may have killed a lot of them. But, you know, I think they killed them because some of them truly were gifted witches, you know, and not just people that were hated by their neighbor. So I think that's really huge in our human consciousness when we take that on and we really truly understand that some people are blessed with gifts like clairvoyance and premonition and ESP. And when you look into like the history of MK Ultra, like the US government and other governments like Russia did a lot with psychics and so forth. Like these people are part of underground systems, you know, that people use for remote viewing and all kinds of things. So I don't even think the mainstream culture understands like the depth to these gifts, you know. I don't have anything else to share. That's it. I'm good for my share. Does anyone else want to share before we say goodbye? Go ahead. Yeah, jump in.
I just have so many amusing stories I love sharing, so I'll just share another one that I remembered. A few years ago, I was living in a subsidized housing complex with all kinds of interesting people, many going through spiritual emergency. And this one night, I felt like I really needed to lay out all of the things that I would take with me if there was going to be a fire. I just kept envisioning the building being set on fire, and I was like, oh, okay, well, it's a good idea to have these things laid out anyway. I've never felt so strongly that I need to have an emergency evacuation plan. And I laid the things out, and it wasn't that night, it was like a night or two later, the fire alarm went off and all my stuff was laid out, and I just grabbed it. And one of the ladies there set the roof on fire, and I even caught like a video of all the paramedics coming up and the firemen and all of that. And it was interesting because I think I might have even documented it. Sometimes I will document things on social media when I have interesting inclinations. So I'm pretty sure I made a post like, I just am having this feeling that the place is going to be set on fire soon. And then I had the video. So sometimes there's even proof for other people to see my psychic gifts. And I find that to be really important because a lot of people don't buy into it. So you can't argue with the cold, hard proof right there. Or the hot, flaming proof, I should say. Anyway, that's all I have to say. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today.
Yes, thank you.
Well, I think it's very powerful for me to see that there's a certain level in the conversation that we achieve or we arrive at when we are past the discrimination and the bias and the prejudice. So it's really comforting, I think, to find that community where you can get to a higher level of understanding or disclosure or talking when you're not having to deal with people's bias and bullshit. So I think it's very refreshing if we create these forums for discussing these issues. And I do think sometimes we always are trying to prove to someone, Christina, you know, that we have these gifts, or maybe prove it to ourselves. But I'm always wondering, like, what happens when I finally like believe it and I just fully trust it and I'm not trying to prove it to anybody. And, you know, I think sometimes there's a fear sometimes in really confronting how powerful we are. So thank you to each one of you. Blessings to everyone, and keep loving your gifts.
Thank you all. It was lovely to connect.
Right on. Have a good night.
Thank you, Leo, for hosting.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you, Christina and Shamsi, for helping. Good night.